Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into ecosystems.
Oh, yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're going to explore what they are
How they work.
and why they're so important.
It's interesting when we think about ecosystems.
Yeah.
We often picture these vast landscapes.
Right, like rainforests.
Exactly. Rainforests, coral reefs.
Huge things.
Yeah. But a tiny rotting log in your backyard is also an ecosystem.
Huh. I never thought about it like that.
It's true.
Okay, so let's back up for a second.
Sure.
What exactly is an ecosystem?
Okay, so think of it like a city.
Okay.
You've got different neighborhoods, different jobs, a whole network of things going on.
Right.
And an ecosystem is basically a community of living organisms interacting with each other and their environment.
So that rotting log.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Okay.
It's got insects breaking down the wood, fungi spreading through it, maybe even a salamander hiding underneath.
Wow.
And they all depend on each other and on that log's environment to survive.
That's pretty amazing.
It is.
So are all ecosystems basically the same, just at different scales?
That's a great question, and the answer is no.
Okay.
There are so many different types.
Like what?
Well, we can divide them into two main categories. Terrestrial,
Okay.
like forests, grasslands, deserts, and aquatic.
Like ponds, lakes, and oceans.
Exactly. And get this, some scientists even consider the entire planet, the biosphere, as one giant ecosystem.
Wow, that's incredible. So within these ecosystems,
Yeah.
big or small,
Uh-huh.
what's actually going on? How do they function?
Okay, so there are four main processes that keep an ecosystem running.
All right, let's hear it.
Productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling.
Okay, those are some big words.
They are, but they're actually pretty simple concepts.
I hope so.
Let's use that pond you mentioned earlier as an example.
Okay.
Sunlight hits the pond,
Right.
and the algae and plants use that energy to grow.
Okay.
That's productivity.
So they're converting sunlight into living matter.
Precisely.
That makes sense. So that's how the ecosystem gets its energy. But what happens to all the stuff that dies in the pond?
Like dead leaves and fish.
Exactly.
That's where decomposition comes in.
Okay.
It's nature's recycling program.
Interesting.
Bacteria and fungi break down that dead organic matter
Okay.
and release nutrients back into the pond's water and soil.
So without decomposition,
Yeah.
the pond would just fill up with dead stuff.
Exactly. It would become a nutrient graveyard.
And then what?
Life couldn't continue.
So it's a cycle.
Exactly. Productivity makes new stuff.
Decomposition breaks down the old stuff.
And it all cycles around.
And the energy from that new stuff,
Yeah.
it doesn't just disappear, right?
No, it flows through the ecosystem.
Okay.
Imagine a tiny fish eats some algae.
Okay.
Then a bigger fish eats that tiny fish.
Uh-huh.
That energy is being transferred.
So it's like a chain reaction.
More like a web, really.
A web.
Yeah, we call it a food web.
Okay.
But we'll get into that more later.
All right.
The key point here is that energy flows in one direction from the sun to the producers.
Which are the plants?
Right. Then to the various consumers.
The animals.
Exactly. And finally to the decomposers.
This is starting to sound like a very intricate dance,
It is.
with every organism playing a specific part.
It's all connected.
So going back to productivity,
Yes.
is all productivity created equal?
Ah, another great question.
Like, is a rainforest more productive than a desert?
You're thinking along the right lines.
Okay, good.
Productivity is the engine of an ecosystem.
And it can vary.
Wildly. We can actually measure it in two ways. Gross primary productivity,
Okay.
which is the total amount of energy captured,
Right.
and net primary productivity, what's left over after the plants use some of that energy for themselves.
Okay, so it's kind of like our salaries.
It-
Gross is what we earn.
And net is what we actually get to keep after taxes.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So a rainforest,
Yeah.
with all its lush greenery, probably has a higher net primary productivity than a desert, right?
You got it. And here's a fascinating fact. Oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface, but they contribute less than half of the total global productivity.
Wait, really? I would have thought the ocean would be like the most productive.
It's teeming with life, but think about what plants need to grow.
Sunlight.
Yes, and nutrients.
Ah, in the ocean.
Yeah, especially as you go deeper, those things can be in short supply.
That makes sense. So even the biggest ecosystems have limits.
They do, but even though those open ocean ecosystems might not be as productive as, say, a rainforest,
Yeah,
they're still vital for the planet.
right, of course. And speaking of productivity,
Yes.
we can't forget about the decomposers.
Absolutely. They're the unsung hero.
Taking down all that dead stuff.
And turning it back into usable nutrients.
Right. It's all connected.
It is.
But how does decomposition actually work?
Oh.
It's not like there are tiny garbage trucks in the forest hauling away dead leaves.
Haha, no tiny garbage trucks.
Yeah.
But the process is fascinating. It's more like taking apart a giant Lego structure.
Okay.
First, you've got the big pieces.
That's where detritivores come in.
Detritivores.
Yeah, things like worms, millipedes.
Okay.
They're like the demolition crew breaking things down into smaller chunks.
So they're making the dead stuff more manageable.
Exactly. Then it's time for the real breakdown crew.
Okay, who's that?
Bacteria and fungi.
Ah, the microscopic guys.
You got it. They release enzymes.
Enzymes?
Yeah, special proteins that break down those smaller pieces into their basic building blocks.
Like?
Things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium.
Ah, so they're turning those complex organic molecules back into simpler nutrients that plants can use.
Exactly. It's a beautiful cycle.
It really is. But it's not instant, right?
Well, it takes time.
Like that rotting log.
Yes, some of that decomposed material forms a rich, dark substance called humus.
Humus. Yeah, I've heard of that.
It's great for gardens.
Oh, really?
Think of it like a slow-release fertilizer.
Interesting.
It holds onto nutrients and improves soil structure, making it easier for plants to grow.
So it's like nature's compost bin. Precisely. Slowly releasing those nutrients back into the ecosystem.
And eventually even that humus breaks down further.
Yeah, releasing those nutrients back into the soil for plants to take up.
Wow, it's like a perfectly choreographed dance.
It really is.
With all these different players working together to keep the ecosystem healthy.
That's a great way to put it.
And remember that energy flow we talked about earlier?
Yes.
To understand that better,
Yeah.
we need to zoom out from that single chain of, say, algae to fish to bigger fish.
Right.
And look at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
The food web. The food web. Because most animals don't just eat one thing, right?
Absolutely.
Like a hawk might eat a snake.
Yeah.
But it could also eat a mouse or a squirrel.
Precisely. So instead of a straight line,
We have a web.
yeah, a web of interconnected relationships.
So a food web shows all the possible pathways that energy can take through an ecosystem.
Exactly. It's like a map of who eats whom, but with lots of arrows going in different directions.
So it's more like a tangled mess than a neat chain.
Haha. That's a good way to put it.
But that messiness is actually what makes ecosystems so resilient.
Right, because if one species declines,
Others can step in.
exactly, and fill the gap,
It's like having a backup generator for the whole system.
you got it.
That's reassuring.
It is.
Seems like nature has a way of balancing things out.
To a certain extent. But even the most resilient ecosystems can be disrupted.
Okay,
Well, think about what happens when a keystone species is removed.
a keystone species.
Yeah, one that plays a particularly important role.
Okay.
The whole web can start to unravel.
So keystone species are kind of like the VIPs of the ecosystem.
I like that analogy.
What kind of impact are we talking about?
Think about sea otters.
Okay.
They love to snack on sea urchins.
Sea urchins.
Now, too many sea urchins can decimate kelp forests,
Kelp forests.
which are vital habitats for tons of other species.
Ah,
But when sea otters are around,
yeah.
they keep the urchin population in check.
So the kelp forests can thrive.
Exactly. And the whole ecosystem stays healthy.
So that's a keystone species in action.
Precisely.
Wow, so one species can really make a huge difference.
They can.
It makes you wonder about the impact we have on these delicate webs.
That's a critical point.
Yeah, because we're part of the ecosystem too.
We are. And habitat loss, pollution, climate change.
Oh, yeah.
All of these things can have ripple effects throughout these food webs.
Sometimes with unintended consequences.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, that's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I have to admit, all these interconnected relationships are making my head spin a little.
I understand.
Is there a way to simplify this to visualize how it all works?
There is.
Okay, good.
Ecologists use something called ecological pyramids.
Ecological pyramids.
Yes.
All right, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
They represent the relationships between different levels of the food chain,
Okay.
or what we call trophic levels.
Trophic levels.
Yeah, and they're like those pyramid diagrams you might see in business presentations,
Okay.
but for ecosystems.
All right, so what do these ecological pyramids tell us?
They help us visualize how energy and biomass,
Biomass.
yeah, the total weight of living things,
Okay.
are distributed throughout an ecosystem.
We can build pyramids based on...
The number of organisms,
Okay.
the amount of biomass at each level,
All right.
or the energy flow through the system.
So what does a pyramid of numbers look like?
Okay, imagine a typical grassland.
Okay.
You'd have a massive base of grasses.
The producers.
Right. Then you'd have a smaller layer of herbivores, like rabbits, munching on those grasses.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, an even smaller layer of predators, like foxes, feeding on the rabbits.
So the pyramid would be wide at the bottom,
and narrow at the top.
reflecting that there are more producers than consumers.
Exactly.
More grass to feed the rabbits.
Fewer rabbits to feed the foxes.
Makes sense. What about biomass? Is that pyramid the same?
Usually, yes.
Okay.
In most terrestrial ecosystems, the pyramid of biomass also has that classic pyramid shape.
But there are exceptions.
There are, particularly in aquatic environments.
Oh, really?
Like in the open ocean, for example, you might have a small biomass of phytoplankton. Those tiny algae we talked about earlier,
Right.
supporting a much larger biomass of zooplankton that graze on them.
Wait, a smaller biomass can support a larger one?
It seems counterintuitive, but it's all about turnover.
Turnover?
Yeah, phytoplankton might have a small biomass at any given moment,
Okay.
but they reproduce so rapidly.
So they're constantly replenishing themselves.
Exactly, providing a steady food source for the zooplankton.
It's like a fast food restaurant constantly churning out burgers to feed a crowd.
Good analogy.
But when it comes to energy,
Yeah.
there are no shortcuts
Nope. Pyramids of energy are always upright.
because of that 10% rule,
Exactly.
Right.
Energy is lost at each step as you move up the food chain.
primarily as heat.
Right. So the amount of energy available always decreases as you move up the pyramid.
These ecological pyramids are a great way to visualize the interconnectedness of ecosystems
They are.
and how energy flows through them.
It's a powerful tool.
It really highlights how resilient ecosystems are.
They are, but they're not invincible.
Right, our actions can have a huge impact on these delicate balances.
And sometimes with unintended consequences.
That's a sobering thought. So given everything we've learned, what can we do to protect these ecosystems and ensure their health and ultimately our own?
Well, it's true. The challenges are significant, but we already have many of the solutions.
Oh, that's good to hear.
It's like tending a garden.
Okay.
You need to weed out the harmful stuff and nurture the beneficial things.
I like that analogy.
Mhm.
So what are some of the weeds we need to pull out?
Habitat loss is a big one.
Okay.
When we convert forests to farmland or pave over wetlands, we're basically shrinking the space available for wildlife and disrupting those delicate connections we've been talking about.
It's like removing parts from a finely tuned engine.
Exactly. Eventually, it's going to stop working.
So it's not just about protecting individual species.
No.
It's about protecting entire habitats.
Precisely. And pollution is another major weed. Chemicals from agriculture, industrial waste, plastic in the ocean, all of these things contaminate ecosystems and disrupt their natural processes.
It's like introducing a virus into a computer system.
Exactly. Things start to malfunction.
And then there's climate change,
It
which feels like a giant looming weed.
is a huge challenge. Shifting weather patterns, rising sea levels, more frequent extreme events.
Yeah.
All of these put tremendous stress on ecosystems, making it harder for species to adapt and survive.
It's like turning up the heat in a greenhouse.
Right. Some plants might thrive, but others will wither.
Okay, so we've got a lot of weeding to do.
We do.
But what about the nurturing part? What can we do to actually help ecosystems thrive?
Well, that's where things get exciting.
Oh,
We can protect and restore habitats, creating corridors for wildlife to move between fragmented areas.
So like building bridges across those broken connections.
Exactly. We can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and transition to cleaner sources of energy, slowing down the pace of climate change.
So driving less, planting more trees, being mindful of what we consume, those are all steps in the right direction.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual actions.
Right.
We need systemic change policies that promote sustainable agriculture, protect our oceans, and incentivize green technologies.
So it's about rewriting the rules of the game so that everyone is playing for the same team.
Exactly.
Team Planet Earth.
You got it.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey.
It has.
From tiny rotting logs to the vastness of the ocean, from the intricate dance of decomposition to the complex web of life.
We've covered a lot of ground.
It's made me realize how much we depend on these ecosystems
We do.
and how important it is to protect them.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
Likewise.
I hope our listeners have come away with a sense of wonder,
Yeah.
a deeper understanding of how ecosystems work, and a renewed commitment to protecting our planet.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Remember, every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the amazing world around us.